My name is Ryan. I don't remember exactly what happened, but the memories of the impact still floated in my mind like shards of scattered glass. A car, the screeching sound of tires on asphalt, the thud, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, it wasn't the hospital I expected to see. In fact, it wasn't anything I could recognize. I was lying on an endless expanse of gray, hardened sand, as if the ground itself had been scorched for centuries. The air was dense, heavy, and the sky above wasn't really a sky but a mass of thick, motionless clouds that pulsed faintly, as if they were breathing. I stood up with difficulty. There was no sun, no moon, no stars. Just a strange light, enough to see what was in front of me. An old, yellowed scroll that seemed deliberately left there. I crouched and picked it up with trembling hands. The edges were burned, and the text was written in ink that seemed alive, pulsing in the same rhythm as the clouds above. The message was simple, 5 rules, but every word felt heavy, as if carrying a terrible secret. The rules were clear. 1. Do not look back, no matter what you hear. 2. At every gate you cross, memorize the guardian's name. 3. If you hear your name being called, do not answer, for obey the guides, but never trust them. 5. You have 7 days to complete your descent. I read the rules more than once, trying to understand what they meant. But before I could process anything, I felt a weight descend upon me. I looked ahead and saw a figure. It was tall, hooded, and emanated a presence that drained the strength from my legs. It had no face, or, if it did, it was hidden in the deep shadow of the hood. Its arms were thin, almost skeletal, and its hands, protruding from the sleeves, held a scepter that seemed to be made of intertwined bones. It didn't speak, only extended a bony arm and pointed toward the horizon. I followed the direction indicated by that skeletal finger. A monumental gate loomed in the distance, so massive it made the ground seem insignificant. The doors were covered in strange symbols, forming a pattern that seemed to shift every time I blinked. Staring at it too long made my eyes burn. "What is that?" I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The figure didn't answer. It simply observed me for a few more seconds, then turned and vanished, as if it had never been there. I was alone again. I looked at the gate and felt despair trying to consume me, but I knew I had no choice. Whatever this was, whatever those rules meant, there was only one path forward. With trembling knees and a pounding heart, I began walking toward the gate. The gate didn't open for me. It swallowed me. As I crossed the titanic arch, I was engulfed by suffocating heat. The world changed. There was no longer gray sand or the heavy silence of that somber desert. Now, I was in a place that felt alive, pulsing like a feverish heart. The air was saturated with an intoxicating scent, something between wilted flowers and rotten fruit, provoking a mix of attraction and revulsion. The ground beneath my feet was soft and warm, like flesh. I looked around and saw bodies. Not corpses, but human figures in constant motion, writhing in a frenzy of insatiable desire. Men and women embraced, kissed, and wept, but something was deeply wrong. Their hands never fully met. Their lips passed through each other as if they were ghosts. The eyes of these souls were hollow, hungry. When they noticed my presence, they began dragging themselves toward me. "Please, help!" cried a woman crawling with outstretched arms, her skeletal fingers nearly touching my foot. Just one touch, just a moment, before I could react. More and more figures appeared, forming a frenzied mass around me. Their voices intertwined in a chaos of pleas and moans. They all wanted something from me, something I didn't even know I had. "Get away! Stay away from me!" I shouted, retreating, but they didn't stop. Hands reached for me, and wherever their fingers touched, I felt a heat that burned like boiling oil. That's when I heard it. A voice. Her voice. "Ryan," it called, soft and sweet, cutting through the chaos like a sharp blade. "Ryan, please look at me." I froze. I knew that voice. My heart clenched, my chest ached. It was Emily's voice, my girlfriend. Or at least the woman I'd lost years ago. My Emily. No, I murmured, closing my eyes. The words of the rules surfaced in my mind. Do not look back, no matter what you hear. Why are you ignoring me? The voice insisted. Now it sounded closer, more desperate. I need you, Ryan. You left me. Why? My hands trembled. I knew it was a trap, but the temptation to turn my head was unbearable. What if it really was her? What if somehow she was here needing me? It's not real, I repeated to myself like a mantra, clutching the scroll tightly. But the words brought me no comfort. The moans of the souls around me began to merge with that familiar voice, which now sobbed and pleaded. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my skin. I didn't turn. I didn't give in. Suddenly, the sound ceased. I opened my eyes. The figures had retreated, leaving an empty space before me. In the center of this void, something appeared. The Guardian. It was a grotesque mixture of flesh and metal. A thin, disproportionate body with ribs protruding like claws. Its face was covered by a rusty helmet with a small opening revealing a single burning, yellow eye. It held a staff made of twisted bones, and its voice was a deep, guttural growl that echoed inside my mind. You resisted, mortal, it said, its voice heavy and ominous. Many fall before they even meet me. I stood motionless, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Why are you here? I asked, my voice barely audible. The Guardian tilted its head as if studying my question. Then it laughed, a dry, hollow sound that made my stomach churn. There are no whys here, it said. There are only choices, and you have one to make. It raised its hand, and a small blue flame appeared in its palm. Inside it, I saw something, a memory. It was my mother's face, smiling at me when I was a child. I could hear her laughter, feel the warmth of that lost moment in time. Give me your most precious memory, mortal, and I will offer you an escape, it said. The flame grew brighter. You don't need to continue. Go back. Forget this place and live in peace. I swallowed hard. The offer was tempting, a way out, an escape. But the thought of losing that, of giving up that memory, made me want to scream. It was all I had left of who I was. No, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I won't give up. The Guardian didn't react immediately. He simply tilted his head again, as if my answer intrigued him. Then he stepped aside, revealing another gate behind him. Very well, mortal. Prove to me that you deserve to continue. With no other choice, I passed by him. As soon as I set foot near the next gate, the world around me began to collapse. The heat, the starving souls, everything vanished. But as I crossed into the next circle, I heard Emily's voice one last time, so faint that I almost thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Ryan, please, don't leave me here. I didn't look back. When I crossed the gate, the heat changed. It was no longer the oppressive burn of desire, but something dense and suffocating, like the vapor of molten metal. The ground beneath my feet wasn't solid. It felt like a sea of molten gold, thick and viscous, hardening and cracking in constant cycles. In the distance, I saw mountains made of shimmering coins, jewels, and piled treasures, but nothing there seemed stable. Every time someone tried to climb, the peak would collapse, dragging everything and everyone back down. The souls here were different from those in the previous circle. They didn't beg for help. They were obsessed, determined to reach something they could never truly possess. Their faces were twisted by greed, their eyes reflecting only the golden glow surrounding them. Some of them wept, but they kept climbing, clawing with their nails and teeth, ignoring open wounds and broken bones. What is this place? I muttered to myself, but my voice was swallowed by the constant sound of melting metal, like a boiling river. I moved forward cautiously, feeling the oppressive weight of the saturated air pressing down on my body. That's when I saw it. In the center of that insane landscape, a creature waited. It resembled a man, but it wasn't. Its skin gleamed as if made of pure gold, but cracks ran along its surface, and through them, I could see something dark and pulsating. He sat on a throne made of stacked crowns and held a scepter ending in an unbalanced scale. His eyes were empty sockets, yet I knew he was watching me. "A visitor," he said, his voice sounding like coins falling to the ground. "How curious. You make it this far." I didn't respond immediately. Something about him deeply unsettled me, as if every word from his mouth could wrap around my mind and trap me. "I'm just passing through," I finally said, trying to sound firm, but my words came out weak. He laughed, a dry and cruel sound. "Passing through, are you? No one passes through here without paying the price. I'm not interested in your gold." "Gold?" He laughed louder, leaning forward. "Who said the price is gold? No, mortal. The price here is something far more valuable." I stood frozen, waiting for him to continue. He rose, towering and imposing, and began circling around me. "Tell me, traveler, what do you fear losing most? Is it your freedom, your identity, your sanity?" My throat dried up. I didn't answer. A curious silence. He stopped, staring at me with those empty sockets. "It doesn't matter. Greed isn't just for riches, you know. No, it manifests in ways you don't yet understand." He raised the scale in his hand, and suddenly my body felt heavy. My chest tightened as if something invisible was trying to rip my heart out. "Just a small piece," he murmured. "A fragment of who you are. A lapse, a fraction of your sanity. That's all I need." My mind started to spin. I could feel something being pulled from me, something I couldn't identify. I tried to step back, but the ground around me seemed to grow and mold into a closed circle, trapping me. "I won't give you anything," I shouted, fighting against the suffocating sensation. The creature tilted his head and gave a crooked smile. "Oh, but you already have." He pointed to the ground, and I saw a strange shadow cast beneath my feet. It wasn't mine. It was something darker, twisted, like a deformed representation of myself. The moment I realized it, I felt a sharp pain in my head, as if a nail had been driven into my brain. "A piece of your sanity," he said with a satisfied tone. "Just enough for you to continue. But beware, mortal. The descent only gets harder from here." The ground around me began to crack, and the sound of molten metal grew louder. The creature laughed again as the golden world collapsed, revealing another gate ahead, smaller than the last but even more sinister. I moved forward, my body weak and my mind foggy. Every step felt heavier, as if something inside me was fragmenting. When I looked at the scroll in my hands, I saw something that wasn't there before. 6. Never lose sight of who you are. The letters pulsed as if alive, but I could barely focus on them. I felt an emptiness growing in my mind, like an echo. Something was wrong, and I knew I had lost a part of myself in that place. Without looking back, I crossed the gate. The air on the other side was heavy and suffocating, but not from heat or humidity. It felt as though each breath pulled an ancient, primal rage into my soul. Something not from me but seeking to root itself deep within. The ground became thick, black mud, teeming with decaying life. It clung to my feet, trying to pull me under with every step. The stench was unbearable, a mix of sulfur, rotting flesh, and something acidic that burned my eyes. Around me, the silhouettes of dead trees rose like outstretched arms, their twisted branches swaying to the sound of screams and roars echoing from every direction. They were here. The souls of this circle didn't crawl or beg for help. They fought. In the swamp, deformed figures attacked each other with blind ferocity, drowning one another in the fetid muck. Every time an arm was ripped off or a head was submerged beneath the viscous surface, the same body would rise moments later, only to restart the endless cycle of violence. My heart raced as I felt something trying to grab my leg. I looked down and saw a skeletal hand clutching my calf. I kicked hard, and the creature sank back into the mud, roaring with a voice more animal than human. I knew I couldn't stop. Every step took more out of me, but something worse began to happen. The rage. It started as a wave, slow at first but inevitable. Every sight of those souls tearing into each other added weight to my chest. Every scream of fury echoed in my mind, reverberating in places I didn't even know existed. Dark thoughts began to creep in like poison. Memories of old arguments, betrayals, injustices. "You're weak, Ryan. You always were." The voice came from somewhere to my right. I stopped and looked around, but saw no one. "You let people walk all over you. You let Emily go. Why didn't you fight for her?" I clenched my fists, trying to ignore the voice. "You should have done something. Should have yelled, hit, anything. But no, you just let it all happen. Like always." The voice blended with the hum of screams around me, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. But it knew exactly where to strike. I was on the verge of shouting back when something moved ahead of me. A man. No, not a man exactly. He was tall and thin, but his skin was gray, covered in scars that glowed like smoldering embers. He wore a tattered cloak and carried a staff that seemed alive, a twisted tree with roots that moved ever so slowly. His face was partially obscured by a broken mask, leaving only one eye visible, glowing a deep, malevolent red. "Lost your way?" he asked, his voice low and hissing. "Or have you found what you've been searching for? Who are you?" I asked, keeping a safe distance. "A guide, perhaps," he said with a cold, cruel smile. "I'm here to help." My hands instinctively tightened around the scroll. "Obey the guides, but never trust them. If you're a guide, show me the way to the next gate." The man tilted his head, as if studying me. "Oh, it's simple. Follow me, and I'll lead you to the destination you seek." "And the price?" His smile widened, revealing sharp, pointed teeth. "The price will always be fair." He began walking, moving effortlessly through the mud that clung to me with every step. I glanced down, feeling the muck rising to my knees, growing thicker. The anger in my chest was swelling, making it harder to focus. The guide stopped and glanced over his shoulder. "Come, before the fury consumes you. Or would you rather join them?" In the distance, the relentless battles of the souls raged on, and the thought of becoming one of them filled me with dread. But something didn't feel right. He was leading me too quickly, without resistance. My mind struggled to focus. I scanned the surroundings and noticed that the dead trees formed a pattern. It wasn't obvious at first, but I saw that the tallest trunks aligned, creating a narrow path that stood out from the areas where the mud was thicker. "You're lying," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He stopped walking but didn't turn. "Am I?" he asked with disdain. "I'll find my own way." The guide slowly turned, his smile vanishing. "You think you can outsmart the swamp? It knows what's inside you. It will consume your anger and turn it into something you can't control." "Maybe, but I don't trust you." He stood still for a moment, but then his face twisted into something monstrous. His gray skin shimmered, and he transformed into a grotesque figure, half mud, half fire, before vanishing in an explosion of steam. I was alone again, but now I knew what I needed to do. I followed the path formed by the trees, fighting against the mud and the screams that tried to invade my mind. When I finally saw the next gate, I felt a fleeting sense of relief. The swamp seemed to resist me more fiercely, pulling at my legs with greater force. But with one last effort, I reached the archway. As I crossed it, the stench and the screams ceased, but the weight of the anger lingered dormant. I looked at the scroll, which now displayed another rule. 7. Control your fury, or it will control you. I knew I wasn't free from what the swamp had planted inside me. Deep down, I feared what might come next. Crossing the next gate felt like diving into a bottomless abyss. The world around me changed to something even more desolate, more suffocating. I was in a vast, endless desert where the sand wasn't golden but gray, as if made of ash and crushed bones. The sky was dull, with no sun, just a uniform glow that seemed to drain the remaining energy from me. The heat here wasn't searing like in the previous circle. It was subtler, insidious, like a low fever that made me weaker with every step. And the wind was relentless, dragging particles of sand in lazy whirlwinds that, as they passed, exposed bodies. They weren't buried. They were being dragged by the desert, motionless, as if they had simply given up resisting the wind. Their expressions were vacant. No pain, no fear, just absolute apathy. I kept walking, trying to ignore the heaviness building in my legs. Every step was harder than the last. My heart was beating slowly, almost lazily. I knew something was draining me, but I couldn't pinpoint what. "Stop," came a voice from within me, a soft, persuasive whisper. "You've done enough. Just sit down and rest." "I can't stop," I murmured, but my voice sounded weak, even to myself. "Why keep going? What do you really hope to find at the end of this? None of it matters." My steps slowed, almost as if the ground was rising to hold me still. I looked around and saw the souls in the wind. They didn't scream. They didn't beg. They simply let themselves be carried, like dry leaves in an eternal autumn. Maybe I should stop." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. My mind was clouded, and the weight of exhaustion was pulling me down. I sat. It was almost automatic. The sand felt cool now, comforting, like a pillow inviting me to a deep sleep. "That's it, Ryan," the voice whispered, stronger now. "Just rest. You've earned it." My vision began to blur. The edges of the scroll in my hands became indistinct smudges, but something inside me screamed to resist. My hand tightened around the scroll, and a flicker of clarity returned. The name. I remembered the rule. At every gate you cross, memorize the name of the guardian. I closed my eyes tightly, fighting against the haze overtaking me, and spoke the name I had seen before the last gate. Aglareth. The response was immediate. The wind stopped abruptly, and the sand around me began to vibrate. A figure emerged on the horizon, walking toward me with slow but deliberate steps. The guardian of this circle was different from the others. He wasn't grotesque or threatening. He wore a simple robe, like a monk, and had a serene, almost human face. But his eyes were black abysses, devoid of emotion, as if he could peer into the depths of my soul and see the parts one preferred to keep hidden. "You've resisted more than most," he said in a calm, almost gentle voice. "But nothing here is free. What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Not what I want, but what you must give. To pass, you must leave something behind." He raised his hand, and something materialized between us. A memory of mine, vivid and crystalline, floating like a hologram. It was me, lying in my childhood bed, listening to my mother hum a lullaby. The peace of that moment nearly brought me to tears. "No," I whispered. "It can't be that one. Your identity lies in what you cherish, mortal," the guardian said. "And to continue, you must surrender who you once were." I wanted to fight, but my mind was too fragmented. I knew that if I didn't give in, I'd be trapped here, in the desert of apathy, until I became one of those souls dragged by the wind. I closed my eyes and nodded. The memory vanished, absorbed by the sand, and immediately I felt something break inside me. It was as if a hole had opened up, a void where warmth and comfort once existed. The guardian stepped aside, revealing the next gate. "Proceed, but remember, every fragment lost brings you closer to who you truly are, or to what you will become." I stood with difficulty, my legs heavy and my mind even more clouded. As I passed through the gate, The desert disappeared behind me, but the emptiness it left within me remained. The scroll in my hands pulsed, and a new rule appeared. 8. Memory is both a burden and a blade. Weigh carefully what you choose to forget. I moved forward, but with each step, a question echoed in my mind. How much of me was left? When I crossed the 5th gate, the world around me shifted once again. It wasn't desolate like the swamp or the desert. This place seemed perfect. I was inside a monumental maze, its walls made of flawless crystal mirrors that shimmered as if bathed in divine light. The polished, reflective floor mirrored every step I took, creating a sense of infinity. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my footsteps. I looked at one of the nearest mirrors, and the reflection I saw wasn't me, or at least it wasn't the Ryan I knew. This me was taller, more confident. His eyes gleamed with determination, and he wore golden armor that radiated power. You could be this, the reflection whispered with a seductive smile. Everything you've always wanted. Everything you were meant to be. I stepped back, startled. This isn't real. The reflection tilted its head, mocking me. Isn't it? Or perhaps this is the real you, and the one walking through this place is just a shadow of what you were meant to be. The tone of its voice was hypnotic. Before I could respond, more reflections began to appear. Each mirror showed a different version of me. In one, I was a celebrated leader, surrounded by crowds applauding me. In another, I sat on a throne, with unimaginable riches at my feet. Each reflection offered an idealized version, a promise of what I could be if I simply gave up continuing. I ventured deeper into the maze, and every new mirror seemed to pull me further in. One showed something even more painful. Emily by my side, smiling as she used to, holding my hand. You can have all of this back, said the reflection of me beside her. You just need to stay. My breathing grew heavier. Something within me began to waver. No, can't. Why not? The reflection demanded, its voice growing angrier. You've walked through pain and darkness. Why? What's at the end of this that's worth more than what's here? I had no answer. My mind was tired, confused. Maybe he was right. Maybe I should stay. Obey the guides, but never trust them. The rule echoed in my mind like a shout. I looked at the reflections again. They weren't traditional guides, but they were guiding me. And, like the swamp's guide, this could only be another trap. With almost superhuman effort, I tore my gaze away. I grabbed a loose stone from the floor, or what seemed to be a stone, and hurled it at the nearest mirror. The glass shattered with a sharp crack, scattering gleaming shards across the maze. A scream echoed, as if the reflection itself had felt pain. The mirrors around me began to tremble, and one by one, the idealized images of me distorted, transforming into grotesque caricatures, laughing and mocking me. Gradually, the maze transformed. The walls lost their luster, revealing a dark, opaque surface, like stones covered in soot. At the center of this new scene, the Guardian appeared. He was unlike any other I'd encountered. His figure was tall and thin, draped in a gray cloak that seemed made of constantly shifting shadows. He had no face, only a black void where his features should have been. But his presence was overwhelming, as if the air around him was heavier. You destroyed your illusions, he said, his voice emanating from every direction at once. But the truth that replaces them is much heavier. Who are you? I asked, trying not to show fear. The reflection of your pride, mortal. The mirror of what you will never be. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. He didn't need to be so cruel. Why are you doing this? Why force me through this? The Guardian tilted his head, as if considering my question. To purge what binds you, to reveal what you truly are. But beware, you've already lost much, and the next steps will demand even more. He raised a skeletal hand and pointed to the next gate, which materialized out of nowhere at the end of an empty corridor. Continue if you have the courage. I looked at the gate, then back at the guardian. Something about him seemed sad, but I had no time to understand it. I passed by him without saying another word. As I crossed the gate, I felt a new weight in my chest. I looked at the scroll, which now bore another rule. 9. Accept the truth even if it destroys what you believe yourself to be. I moved forward, but the thought of the next steps being even harder lingered in my mind. Something inside me was breaking, and I feared that, in the end, nothing of me would remain. As soon as I crossed the next gate, I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. The world around me spun violently, and I was pulled into a force that seemed to come from every direction. It was a colossal whirlpool, a vortex of shadows and flickering lights, where voices echoed in endless whispers. These whispers weren't chaotic. They were hypnotic, like a melody I couldn't ignore. They have everything you've ever wanted, murmured a seductive female voice. Why shouldn't it be yours? Asked another, male and dripping with disdain. As I spun through the vortex, glimpses of what seemed to be memories, mine or others, I couldn't tell, emerged among the shadows. I saw people laughing in golden mansions, driving luxury cars, embracing lost loves, and holding children that seemed to exist only in dreams. Each image hit me like a punch to the gut, reminding me of the growing void inside me. Gradually, I was thrown into a calmer core of the vortex. The ground reappeared beneath my feet, but it was unstable, made of fragments of glass and metal that seemed to float in space. At the center of this place, an object glowed brightly, drawing my attention. It was a spherical stone, translucent and emanating a pulsating light. It seemed alive, its glow synchronized with the beats of my heart. Even without touching it, I knew it was important, vital. Take it. The voice echoed around me, soft but insistent. It's yours. It always has been. My breathing grew heavier, and my legs began to move on their own. Something in me knew I should step back, but the temptation was overwhelming. Each step toward the sphere filled my mind with vivid imaginings. I saw my life change. I was in a place of comfort and safety. I was admired, loved, whole. Emily was there, laughing by my side. Everything I'd lost, everything I'd never had, it was all within reach. All of this can be yours, the voice whispered now inside my head. My hand reached out, hesitant, almost touching the glowing surface. But then, the scroll. I felt its weight in my hand. I remembered the rules. I remembered how every trap so far had tried to manipulate me with the things I desired most. Do not be distracted by what is not essential. I withdrew my hand and stepped back. The sphere flickered violently, and the light that had been warm and inviting turned cold and harsh. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and furious voices filled the air. Accusatory screams echoing in my mind. Coward! You'll never have anything because you're too afraid to take what's yours. Why resist? You don't deserve any of it. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the screams didn't come from outside. They came from within me. The vortex around me began spinning with renewed ferocity, dragging me back into the void. I won't give in, I shouted, my voice swallowed by the chaos. The sphere shattered into shards of glittering glass, which were absorbed into the vortex. The whirlpool then shifted, becoming a force that pushed me forward, hurtling me toward a new gate. When I crossed it, I fell to my knees, gasping for breath. The silence returned, but the weight of what I had just faced still lingered. I looked at the scroll. Another rule had appeared. 10. Envy is a bottomless pit. Never lose yourself in desire for what belongs to others. I stood with difficulty, feeling more fragmented than ever. With each step, I drew closer to the end, but I feared that by the time I reached it, there would be nothing of myself left. Crossing the 7th gate was like plunging into a sea of grotesque, overwhelming abundance. The air was saturated with heavy aromas that were initially enticing but quickly turned nauseating and suffocating. The landscape was an infinite banquet, endless tables overflowing with extravagant dishes, exotic fruits, glistening meats, and goblets brimming with golden liquids. But the souls, they surrounded the tables, devouring everything they could reach. Their bodies were bloated and misshapen, their faces twisted into expressions of simultaneous agony and ecstasy. Their mouths never stopped moving, chewing with desperate ferocity. As I walked, I realized that the hunger here wasn't just for food. It was for everything. Some souls devoured jewels. Others drank goblets of poison as if it were wine. Some threw themselves upon each other in wild acts of lust, while others sobbed, clutching objects that had clearly lost all meaning. Then I saw something that froze me in place. A reflection of myself was among them. It was me, but a grotesque version of me. My mouth was smeared with blood, and my hands clutched pieces of something I couldn't identify. The look in my eyes was vacant, but my body kept moving, consuming, reaching for something it could never satisfy. That is you, or at least a version of you that has been here before. The voice came from behind me, soft yet undeniably authoritative. I turned and saw the guardian of this circle. He was different from the others, not grotesque nor skeletal, but a robust figure wrapped in a scarlet silk robe that seemed to pulse with every movement. His face was beautiful, almost angelic, but his eyes were filled with something dark and insatiable. He held a golden chalice overflowing with a thick liquid, though he never drank from it. Don't worry, mortal. This reflection is not who you are now, but it could be. He smiled, and the beauty of his face turned cruel. This is the fate of all who give in to insatiable appetites. I am not like that. My voice was weaker than I wanted it to be. Aren't you? He took a step closer, and the ground beneath him seemed to quake. Everyone hungers, Ryan. For pleasure, for comfort, for power, for life. Even you. He gestured, and the grotesque reflection of me began to change. Now, it wasn't just eating. It was sitting at a table, surrounded by a family I recognized. Emily was beside me with children I had never had, while the reflection laughed and seemed perfectly happy. This is your appetite, mortal. Not for food, but for everything you've lost, or believe you've lost. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The image was too tempting, almost impossible to resist. Just stay here, the guardian continued. I can give you everything. No more pain, no more difficult choices. Only fulfillment. My chest tightened. He was right. I hungered for all of it. For something to fill the void I had felt since crossing the first gate. And if this is all there is? I asked, doubt creeping in. The guardian laughed, a melodic and cruel sound. That's the question, isn't it? You walk toward the end, but what is the end? What do you hope to find, Ryan? Paradise? Redemption? Or just more emptiness? His eyes bore into me, and I faltered. Then I remembered the scroll in my hands. Obey the guides, but never trust them. I clenched my fists and took a deep breath. This isn't real, I said, more to myself than to him. I won't stop here. The guardian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Then why continue? Answer me, Ryan. Why do you still fight? I didn't have a clear answer. I just knew that if I stopped now, everything I had endured would have been for nothing. Because I'm still me. The guardian smiled, but this time it seemed satisfied. Good answer, but will it be enough in the end? He raised the chalice and poured its contents onto the ground. As he did, the earth around me began to tremble, and the tables, the souls, and the reflections dissolved into golden dust. The next gate appeared before me, almost as if it were alive. Go, mortal. But know this, appetite never disappears. It only changes form. When I crossed the gate, I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and hollow. The scroll pulsed in my hands, and a new rule appeared. 11. True hunger can never be satisfied. Remember what is truly worth seeking. I stood up with difficulty. The next gate awaited, but deep down, a lingering question remained. What was left for me to lose? The cold was the first thing I felt as I passed through the gate. It wasn't just a low temperature. It was a kind of cold that seeped into my bones, made of forgotten memories and buried regrets. Around me, a somber valley stretched out. Dead, ice-covered trees stood like frozen statues, and the ground was a mosaic of dirty snow and shards of ice. Hooded figures were everywhere, as still as shadows, watching me with an attention I couldn't ignore. They made no sound, but I felt their eyes, or whatever lay beneath their hoods, piercing into me. I walked slowly, trying to remain calm, but something was wrong. The air was thick with an invisible tension, as if the valley itself were waiting to betray me. You feel it, don't you? The voice echoed through the valley, a blend of whispers coming from all directions at once. Something is wrong. Something is hidden. Someone is waiting for the right moment to drive the blade. I looked around, searching for the source of the voice, but all I saw were the hooded figures. None of them moved. Who's there? I asked, my voice trembling. Don't you recognize me, Ryan? The voice now sounded familiar, almost like my own. I've been with you since the beginning. The ground beneath my feet began to crack, like ice about to give way. Each step I took felt heavier, as if the valley were pulling me downward. This is the valley of betrayal, Ryan. The voice continued. Here you face the lies you've told yourself. Here you discover that the greatest betrayer has always been you. My heart raced, and memories I had buried began to resurface. Small betrayals that had seemed insignificant at the time but had accumulated over the years. I remembered Emily, the day she needed me, and I chose to run because her problems felt too big for me. I remembered the times I lied to my friends, to my family, to myself, all to avoid the pain of facing my own shortcomings. I'm not a traitor, I murmured, trying to convince myself, but the voice laughed. Aren't you? How many promises have you broken? How many times have you taken the easy way out, leaving behind those who needed you? The hooded figures began to move, forming a circle around me. Each step they took made the ice beneath me creak as if it were about to shatter. You're one of us, Ryan. Traitors. But don't worry, there's always a place for our kind. My entire body trembled. The voice was right. I had failed so many times. I was the traitor. There wasn't someone else waiting for me in this valley. It was me. One hooded figure stopped in front of me, slowly raising its hands to pull back its hood. When its face was revealed, I froze. It was me, but not exactly. This me had dead, hollow eyes and a cold, cruel expression. He held a curved dagger, stained with what looked like frozen blood. You've always known this moment would come, haven't you? My reflection said. What do you want from me? I asked, fighting the panic rising within me. I want you to see, to understand. You were never betrayed. You were always the betrayer. He stepped closer, extending the dagger toward me. Take it. I hesitated. Why would I do that? Because only by facing your failures can you move forward. Only by accepting who you truly are can you escape this place. The hooded figures around me began to close in, the circle tightening. There was no other choice. With trembling hands, I took the dagger. As I did, an even deeper cold invaded my body, as if every lie I had ever told, every promise I had broken, had materialized inside me. Now look at me, my reflection said. I met his eyes. For the first time, I didn't look away. I didn't run. I saw the raw truth of who I was, my failures, my weaknesses, the people I had hurt. It was all there, reflected in his face. I accept, I whispered. My reflection smiled, but it wasn't a cruel smile. It was understanding. He dissolved into mist, and the hooded figures retreated, disappearing into the ice. the valley began to tremble, and a new gate appeared before me, made of transparent ice with a pale light glowing within. I walked toward it and stepped through. On the other side, the scroll in my hands pulsed again, revealing a new rule. 12. Face your failures, for only then will you find the truth. I stood with difficulty. The cold of the valley still lingered in me, but something inside had changed. For the first time, I felt lighter, but what awaited me at the next gate, I didn't know, and that terrified me. The 9th gate was unlike the others. There was no gradual transition, no subtle change in the environment. As soon as I crossed it, I felt as if the world around me had completely vanished. There was no ground, no sky, no walls, only an infinite black void, punctuated by a single distant light. The hooded figure was there, waiting. It didn't seem threatening, but its presence was overwhelming, as though it carried the weight of all my doubts, fears, and choices. The same figure that had given me the rules at the start. Now I faced it again, but something about it felt different. "So, you've reached the center," it said, its voice echoing as if the void amplified every word. "Not many make it this far." I swallowed hard, keeping my distance. "Who are you? What is this place?" The figure took a step forward, the faint light illuminating its hands. They weren't skeletal or deformed as I expected. They were human. "I am what I've always been, Ryan." It raised its hands to remove the hood. When it did, the face revealed was a shock. It was my face, but marked differently. The lines around the eyes weren't from age but from suffering. The lips were cracked, and the eyes reflected a void so deep that I wanted to look away. "I am the manifestation of what you fear most," it said. "Death, the end, the absence of meaning. I am the shadow that guided you here because you never wanted to face what it means to cease existing." "You brought me here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No, you were always coming. I simply held up the mirror so you could see the way." The cold from the valley of betrayal still lingered in my chest, but something deeper began to rise. Anger. "You manipulated me. You made me follow these rules, forced me to face things I didn't write the rules, Ryan." It interrupted, its voice firm but not cruel. "They've always been there. You followed them because you thought they would help you survive." It took another step, and the light around us intensified, revealing the 9th gate. It wasn't a physical door. It was an opening suspended in the void, pulsing with an energy that made me hesitate. "Here is your choice," it said, pointing to the gate. "You can follow the rules to the end and pass through. Accept your fate like all those who came before you. Or?" I asked, my voice wavering. The figure tilted its head, almost as if smiling. "Or you can break the final rule. Look back. Question what has never been questioned." My heart raced. "Rule 5. You have 7 days to complete your descent." Time had been a constant shadow hanging over me since the beginning, a boundary I never dared to challenge. "What happens if I break the rule?" "Then you'll face the unknown. Something beyond this place. Beyond me." "This is a trick," I said quickly, though my voice was weak. "A final test to see if I'm worthy." "There are no tricks here, Ryan." It stared at me with eyes so empty they seemed to devour my soul. "Only choices." I looked at the gate, then at the void behind me. Every part of me screamed to continue, to step through the gate and finish what I started. But then a thought surfaced in my mind. A question I'd never asked myself until now. What if these rules weren't meant to protect me? What if they were a cage? I took a deep breath and stepped back, away from the gate. "I won't go through." The eyes of my reflection narrowed. "You're breaking the final rule?" "Yes." For a moment, nothing happened. The silence was absolute. But then the void around me began to bend, as if it were alive. The light from the gate pulsed violently, almost blinding, and the ground, or whatever was beneath my feet, started to crack. The figure didn't move. It just watched me with a look I couldn't decipher. "You've chosen the unknown." Very well, Ryan. Let the unknown welcome you. The void around me began to fold and shatter like glass about to break. I felt an invisible force pulling me, a push that came from neither above nor below but from within. It was as if every part of my being was being torn apart, rebuilt, and torn apart again. Flashes appeared, like fragments of a distorted film. My childhood, my mother's face smiling as she held my hand. The sound of laughter with friends I hadn't seen in years. Emily, looking at me with that gaze that said she knew everything and accepted me anyway. But the flashes weren't just good memories. I saw my mistakes, the times I ran instead of facing my problems. Arguments I wished I could forget, promises I never kept, and people I had left behind. Each vision was a blade cutting through my consciousness, but at the same time, there was something liberating about them. Accepting these truths didn't destroy me. They were part of me. The pain was excruciating. I felt my entire body being crushed and pulled at the same time. There was no air, no ground, only the dull sound of something like a heartbeat accelerating faster and faster. Slowly, the flashes began to slow. The void disappeared. The circles crumbled like sand blown by the wind. Everything around me dissolved, and a strange sensation began to take hold of me. Pressure. Something pressed against my chest, as if invisible hands were trying to grab me and pull me back. It was suffocating, yet comforting at the same time. A sound pierced the absolute silence. A constant hum, followed by muffled voices. He's coming back. Keep going. The pain grew to an unbearable point, and then everything exploded into light. My vision was a blur. Fluorescent lights above me flickered annoyingly, and the sound of heart monitors filled the room. My chest ached as though someone had hammered an anvil into it. I was alive, gasping. I turned my head and saw a doctor beside me, holding a clipboard and checking a nearby screen. He noticed I was conscious and quickly approached. "Ryan, can you hear me?" My mouth was dry, but I managed to murmur, "Where am I?" The doctor smiled, relieved. "You're in the hospital. You were hit by a car while crossing the street. You've been in a coma for a few days, but it seems we managed to bring you back." The world around me spun, but I couldn't stop thinking about his words. "Bring me back?" The doctor nodded, hesitating slightly. "Yes, you were dead for 30 minutes. We did everything we could to resuscitate you and, well, here you are. 30 minutes. The memories came rushing back like an avalanche. The desert, the circles, the guardians, the rules. The rules, I whispered, almost inaudibly. The doctor frowned. "What did you say? The rules? The circles? The gate?" I tried to sit up, but my body had no strength. "I was there. You were in a deep coma, Ryan. Intense dreams are common in cases like this, especially with the medications we use to keep you stable." I shook my head, my breathing quickening. It wasn't a dream. I was there. Hell, I followed the rules. I broke the last one. The doctor placed a hand on my shoulder to calm me. "Ryan, listen. Your mind went through extreme trauma. Everything you saw was, well, part of your recovery. Your brain's way of making sense of what was happening." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to accept that all of it was just a nightmare induced by the coma. But something inside me knew it was more than that. As he adjusted the monitors and made notes on his clipboard, I stayed silent, trying to organize my thoughts. And then I felt it. Presence. It was subtle but familiar, like a faint chill crawling up my spine. And then I heard it. "We'll meet again." The voice of the hooded figure. Not a shout, but a whisper, soft, yet clear enough to make my heart race. The doctor looked at me, concerned. "Are you all right?" I didn't respond. I just turned my face toward the window, watching the sunlight pour in. Outside, the world looked normal, but I knew something had changed. I was back, but a part of me would never be the same.